welcome to the Gnostic Warriors, Sebastian. How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. How are you doing?
Welcome. You're welcome. I'm doing
great.
And I came across your work when I was following Rupert Sheldrake, and I was really fascinated by your blog and your writings about mystical Christianity and also the psychedelic journey. So I'm very excited to talk about that. But before we get into your great work, can you let the audience know a little bit about who you are and your history?
Sure, yeah. I'm Sebastian, and my background is basically in psychotherapy. I got interested in transpersonal psychotherapy primarily through my personal experiences with mysticism, psychedelics, and explorations, and primarily trying to help people who had similar experiences and were struggling to integrate them into their own lives. So either positive experiences or negative, and I write about this in my book. So you can have extremely transcendental, transformative experiences, or very bad trips, as they're called, which can really throw people. And what I found was, in my experience when I was a teenager, really, there was no one I could really go to with this. So I couldn't go to the church, I couldn't go to conventional therapists because they would just think I was crazy or pathologize. So I mean, there is a growing field now of psychotherapists specifically dealing with psychedelics, and that's a field I was interested in. And in the field generally of what they call spiritual emergencies, spiritual emergence, how to help people who are having intense experiences to deal with them, integrate them, not necessarily with psychedelics, and to help them move forward. So it's a big field, but I came from that direction, from the transpersonal psychology, really.
Sure. And you grew up in the Christian religion as well?
I didn't actually, no. My parents moved to England when I was very young. So their background was Catholic, being from Chile, but they kind of turned against Catholicism, partly for political reasons, because I don't know if you know the history of Chile, but there was a military coup. They were involved in the Marxist kind of government before that. So I was kind of brought up Marxist, let's say, or left-wing or atheist in any case. So they didn't actually christen me or anything like that. And I found Christianity much later in life. Although I did go to kind of Church of England schools, so I was exposed to it, but it was something that I kind of discovered probably after my dabblings in Buddhism and Hinduism and kind of Eastern and New Age kind of stuff. Yeah, so it was a kind of secondhand discovery, really. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting journey along your path of, having a family that is Catholic, and then they come to England, and then they basically turn atheist. I grew up Roman Catholic in my family, and I believe my family slowly over time became atheist, and I also became atheist, and I circled back to Christianity. And you also had psychedelic experiences in your teens and growing up, and as you got older, and then you found through these experiences and also your research into the different religions and your own experiences, that Christianity more interlined with your path and also the psychedelic path?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my first major experience was actually, I understood it in quite a Buddhist framework. That was with LSD, and that was kind of like a classic sort of enlightenment experience, you could say. So that has always stayed with me, and in a way I've never kind of given up on that kind of way of seeing things. But in my 20s I got involved with a shamanic group that basically did ceremonies using ayahuasca, and that was a very different context, and that was the kind of first time when it was much more kind of Christian based, in a sense. The kind of ceremonial, it was kind of mixed with other things as well, but that made a lot of sense of the ayahuasca experience, because it was very much it's much more about the relationship to a kind of higher power, and a lot of Christian themes kind of came up. And in Latin America, that's like kind of syncretism between shamanism and Christianity has been there for centuries, really. I mean, it's not necessarily on the surface, but you know, a lot of shamans in Peru and Ecuador and Brazil actually are following a kind of mixture of Christian and kind of indigenous ideas. Often, you know, Westerners, especially Americans, who go there to get the kind of the whole like authentic as they looking experience, they will dress it up into shamanic thing with the feathers and all the rest of it, and they'll actually take away the Christian element because they think that's what the gringos want, you know. But actually the more authentic stuff, unless you know, you go to the right into the jungle, to the, you know, the tribes, is a kind of syncretic Christian thing, and the two traditions melded really well together. So actually there is a very natural relationship there, I think.
And you believe that this contact with the shamans and the indigenous cultures in, say, South America was the result of the Roman Catholics and Jesuit missionaries over the past few hundred years going down there and them kind of intertwining and sharing
Exactly.
teachings and religions?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting confluences that happened and similarities with a lot of the religions that they had. For example, the Aztecs had a you know, god that was very similar to Christ, which is why they kind of accepted the Europeans so easily, partly. Also, the music is very interesting to see how music was appropriated. So a lot of the original first missionaries who arrived brought with them a lot of instruments from Spain, and they were basically kind of Italian Baroque style, sort of Vivaldi kind of style, which is very different to the music that was in South America, but somehow it worked together. The kind of the rhythms, you know, there was some kind of strange kind of symbiosis even in the music that now has produced you know, a lot of Andean music and different styles now. So yeah, it's been a very fruitful mixture from the beginning, really.
Yeah, and you know, so you know, Sebastian, I lived in New Mexico for a few years here,
Yeah.
a few years back, and there's a lot of Native American cultures that are there, and various tribes and so forth. And same thing there, you know, they celebrated the various Christian holidays, but they still celebrated all their indigenous holidays and their rites, and they would meld them into them. And I got invited to the range there by a family that I befriended, and we became good friends. But you know, we were one of the only, say, you know, white European type of family there amongst just hundreds. And I saw a lot of Christian themes within even in their indigenous culture and in their various rites. So it was interesting to see. And even though I didn't see any psychedelics being partaken in, I felt like some of the shamans and the higher people there were doing it. So it was really interesting. And I feel somewhat that's what happened with Christianity. I believe in the past there was more of a mystical sense to it, and then I don't know what happened over time. It somewhat got maybe watered down. Do you have any knowledge or research about Christian missionaries or Jesuits partaking in these ceremonies, or possibly being a shaman?
Well, I think the official line was quite anti the whole thing. So a lot of, especially, you know, coming from Spain, probably Jesuits who became more integrated may have partaken, but they wouldn't have been open about it, you know, because the church in Spain would have been very damning of the whole thing. So there was actually, you know, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of it. You know, there was a lot of repression and a lot of persecution as well, which is why it had to really go underground. But it's kind of inevitable that there was, you know, there was this kind of mixing, you know, in this similar way that there was intermarriage, you know. So a lot of kind of like families maybe would be a bit quiet about the you know, the indigenous kind of children that they'd have, but it happened. So it was definitely a melting pot you know, for centuries. And
that's what I see everywhere, Sebastian. You know, no matter what type of religion or culture comes in, usually it becomes a melting pot. You know, we don't all
yeah,
look and act the same, or, you know, we're to follow these laws and these religious laws, like we're all supposed to be the same, but we all tend to, you know, honor them, but also follow our own paths while we,
mm-hmm.
you know, act under this religion. And I feel that's almost as if what God wanted. I
Yeah.
don't know, but I mean, I look around the planet and that's what I see.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know, the things that I see affecting us are more of the ideas and the beliefs that we have, that where we contradict as humans.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about integral psychedelic Christianity. You know, did you dub that term?
Yeah, that's that kind of sums up in a way my approach, which has those three elements, that it's kind of integral, psychedelic, and Christian. So yeah, it's should I explain what I mean by that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So it's one way of thinking about it, because it's kind of something that I've been developing for a long time. Was, I mean, going back to my own history, the reason I kind of started with psychedelics partly was because the kind of secular world that I saw around me when as a teenager seemed to be missing some special magic that kind of wasn't there, that psychedelics seemed to offer, that needed somehow to kind of transform things, you know, to move, you know, everything was a bit too kind of square, let's say. So psychedelics was a very exciting, very romantic kind of proposition to kind of change society, to change people, to open people's minds, to kind of, you know, to have a kind of spiritual renaissance, let's say, because, you know, from the mystical experiences that I had with it. So I think it's quite common to have this sense and to try to find a context in which to kind of contain these experiences, and that has tended to be a kind of new age context, so that, you know, people who start taking these things seriously then start to look all over, you know, to the east and to esoterica and all this kind of stuff, to try to make sense of their experiences and to try to kind of create a kind of worldview that kind of can fit in the world. And then I found eventually that Christianity was a really, really good fit, especially with my experiences with the kind of shamanic South American stuff, particularly because of, you know, it was kind of obvious that, you know, you have this sacrament, which is kind of like a placebo, but like, you know, what if it's psychoactive, you know, if it's the actual yahe or the ayahuasca, you know, that changes everything. And all of the themes of death and rebirth within Christianity suddenly take on a whole different meaning and you know, come to life really when you see it in that context. But then I also felt that that the psychedelic Christianity, just those two together, still didn't quite encapsulate the whole of the experience, because there's a very physical bodily element, for example, especially with ayahuasca, which, you know, is to do with healing, which is just to do with all these energies that you kind of experience in your body. Lots of things start happening with your breathing, with the Icaros, where you start kind of chanting, with movements, with dance. It's a very bodily, physical thing. It's also very emotional. There's a lot of kind of catharsis. You have all these insights, cosmic, philosophical things. So it's got all these different dimensions, which if you just have a very traditional religious frame, it kind of doesn't capture all of that. It's kind of like, you know, these fall through the net in a sense. So that's why I thought, you know, a lot of the transpersonal studies that I looked into, I was very influenced by writers like Ken Wilber, who has, you know, a kind of integral studies famously in the States, Sri Aurobindo, who had an integral yoga before him, Gurdjieff, Fourth Way, who was also looking at how can we have a more holistic approach to spirituality, not just, you know, specializing as a, you know, a yogi or a monk or a fakir, as he put it. So there was this movement which is part of the New Age in a way, to have a much more integrated, holistic model. And that's what I was trying to achieve within the Christian context, basically. So that was the basic idea. And yeah.
Makes perfect sense, Sebastian. You know, when you think about it, us Christians, Catholic, whatever denomination we have grown up under in the West, which primarily most of us have, you know, when we start growing out of the house and having these experiences, it's hard to relate to our own culture, our own religion, because it's frowned upon and it's rejected, and there's no teachings or mystical knowledge. Well, there is now, right, with guys like you that are coming out with this stuff to help people understand it. But I also agree with you that Christianity is a mystical religion, and it is also psychedelic. And I contend, you know, 2,000 years ago and probably up even way longer than that, they have been using psychedelics behind closed doors and venturing into this knowledge, this forbidden gnosis per se. You know, and if we look at, you know, the Christians in the West and the Jesuits in the church, I mean, they've been in charge of starting the universities and kind of holding this knowledge at bay and really being the gatekeepers to this knowledge. And it's slowly being released out into the West here. And of course, all these different organizations, and we could talk freely about it and talk about the Bible and about Christian teachings and about psychedelics without fear of persecution, which is probably a first in world history. So it's really interesting that now we're coming to this, and I'm finding now that I feel free to delve into the Christian teachings and, you know, the mystical side and, you know, dissect them. I understand that they've also been doctored and they've been changed. You know, they came from the Phoenician, the Hebrew to the Greek, and eventually the Latin, and then to the Old English and to the English. And so we have all these different variations, and they've also been doctored and changed because I believe they do contain mystical gnosis and teachings that the church at one time did not want to get out. And I believe that's actually part of Revelations. The apocalypse is actually this very thing. So it's really interesting. Are you finding any acceptance among theologians or high church officials for this type of teachings?
Well, I'm trying to approach churches to see if I can get an in a sense, because ideally what might happen is that we can revive this within the church rather than it be, you know, a kind of very
adversarial,
and fringe kind of thing, which, you know, inevitably it is because of the legal status of the psychedelic. So that's kind of, you know, and obviously that's going to be difficult, and there's a lot of resistance, and I haven't had much success with that so far. I mean, obviously people like Rupert Sheldrake are very interested in that area and are also trying to push for that kind of, in a way, institutionalization of the psychedelics, almost like you know, a special like order, you could say, like, you know, like the Franciscans. There could be a psychedelic order, why not? You know, and then obviously all of the resources that, you know, in Britain we have so many churches and retreat centers and, you know, beautiful buildings and cathedrals and places that, well, obviously now are empty because of the lockdown, but are really, really underused and could actually become an incredible resource for people to go on pilgrimage, for example, to have retreats, to have kind of experiences using these, you know, psychedelic sacraments. And it could actually be a really, really powerful, fruitful thing eventually within the church, you know, and then you could have safeguards and ways to make it, you know, to kind of support people in that, which is interesting as a thought. Maybe it's too ambitious and kind of unrealistic at the moment, but it's interesting to start thinking about that and how that might differ, for example, from the medical model, you know, which is taking off very quickly now in terms of in the therapeutic setting. So that all the kind of clinical trials are doing at Johns Hopkins and Imperial.
More the atheistic side, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a secular version. You know,
Sure.
you're in a nice, clean clinical room, and you lie down with your shades, and and
But
you know, unless you have a sitter, it's very different. Yeah.
and then also there's usually nefarious people behind this stuff that are seeking to profit mainly rather than to advance humanity and our spiritual needs, right?
That's the other worry, that there is obviously a lot of money involved. So already it looks like people are kind of trying to jump on the bandwagon and try to kind of patent these things and to control them. And again, you know, to be the kind of gatekeepers of them for profit. And that's, you know, some of them in a cynical way, some of them well-intentioned, maybe trying to kind of grow the thing. But
Sure.
it's a really, really kind of key, crucial moment, in a way similar to what happened in the 60s, where it's so important what happens in the next few years and how we manage this kind of new psychedelic renaissance, as they call it. Because the 60s, it kind of all went wrong, partly Timothy Leary. I'm not putting it all on Timothy Leary, but, you know, kind of just like, you know, just give it to the people and turn everyone on. That didn't work, you know. And then there's a huge backlash, and the whole war of drugs kind of like threw the whole thing, you know, into the, you know, into touch really for decades. So and you know, people have still been continuing underground in a kind of small way, but obviously all the funding and all the kind of professional research was stopped, which was already showing promising results from the 50s. So it seems that they're moving very, very carefully now in, you know, in terms of the academic and the scientific research, and they're being super cautious because of the 60s. So that was the kind of like their warning.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that briefly. So what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that, you know, we opened up the floodgates in the 60s and the 70s with, you know, Timothy Leary, and, you know, it was being done underground, but also being promoted. And this was kind of the liberal, where we basically, it was kind of just have fun and do what you want generation. And I grew up during that time as well. And I partaken in that type of liberal activities, and it ended up going towards my destruction many times, and my friends and so forth. So what I believe is there's limits that need to be put on it, and not everybody, of course, should do it, and people should have the proper guide, you know. And back to the religious side of it as well. Hasn't it always been the stance of the church and, you know, theologians and religious leaders, at least in the modern era, that this is more of like partaking in the demonic realm and the devil and so forth? So when you do this, they automatically think, you know, you're doing it for nefarious reasons or deeds. And what my experiences, and I'm assuming you, Sebastian, and probably millions of other people, have had spiritual heavenly experiences through this, and we're able to maybe see religion. And that's what I believe people do, is after these experiences, they're awakened spiritually, but they're denied by their church, they're denied by their priest in the Christian religion. That's why they go to the East, where they're more open to that. So let's talk a little bit about that. Is that's the belief of the church, that it's more of the demonic realm?
Well, that was definitely big, you know, when the Spanish first went to South America. So that's why there was so much persecution, because it was, you know, they saw this, you know, their kind of instinctual reaction was, this is demons, this is demonic, and they wanted to cure the you know, these poor indigenous of that, and to show them the light and the kind of the Christian, you know, to be saved by Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And we still kind of, that still is a bit of a hangover that we have now in a lot of Christians who don't really know much about, you know, the psychedelics, really just assume that there's something demonic about it. But that's what has to change. I mean, and I think that in a way probably has changed since the 60s. Even thinking about what priests, you know, locally I could go to churches to talk to see if they'd be interested. My idea was to kind of start these kind of meditation sessions within the church with a kind of virgin psychedelic kind of meditation, where it would be the same kind of meditation, but without the drug, so that people would be able to start to get used to that way of worship and that way of meditating. And then I realized actually a lot of these priests are younger than me, you know, and like there's one who's at a church near me who's kind of got these you know, those earlobes that hang down, and he's got a kind of ring on his lip and tattoos and all the rest of it. It's like the new generation of within the church, a lot of them have come to it through their own personal spiritual awakenings, possibly through psychedelics, but even if not, they will be far more open-minded and more knowledgeable about it than the, you know, even one generation ago. So I think there's an inevitable shift happening generationally because of that. So that gives me some kind of hope that you know, the kind of prejudice against it is not so entrenched among the young. Maybe they feel that they have to toe the line for their, you know, because of their career and the way that it's perceived. But I still think that there's a slow kind of shift of attitude in the right direction.
Yeah.
And what is the key, in a sense, what you're saying about having a guide who is experienced enough, because the difference between, let's say, the religious model and the medical model is that you go to these clinics and you have a professional, maybe they have qualifications, they sit with you, you fill in a form, you tick all the boxes, it's all good, you have contraindications, blah, 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 blah. They go through the protocol and great. But a lot of people know that that's not the real deal. If you want the real thing, you need to go to a shaman. You need to go to someone who is deeply, who has been there themselves, have been like way down and, you know, to hell and to heaven. They've been there, and they can take you. So the kind of shamanic, the shamanic kind of context isn't just that they sit with you and hold your hand and make sure you're okay and get you a cup of tea afterwards. They engage with you, and they basically get involved in the experience and bring it up. I mean, this was something that I've noticed in Western gringo kind of ceremonies, where a lot of the more inexperienced shamans who kind of hold the space, their main concern is safety. And what they want is to keep everything quiet. It's like, no, you know, don't go crazy, don't overdo it, you know. And so they're trying to keep a lid on everything. Whereas the real experienced shaman kind of does the opposite. They bring it up, they fan it. They want you to kind of really go there, because they're confident that they can deal with it. So it's the same as in, let's say, you know, within the church, you have very, you know, the mystics. You go to a monastery and you go to speak to the father, you know, can counseling, whatever. You want someone who is an expert, you know, who's an expert mystic, let's say, and that's what the church can provide. But there is also space for expert shamans, you know, that also could be contained within the church. The two things, the mystic and the shaman, being two poles of the same experience ultimately. And that's, in a way, what I think needs to happen if Christianity is going to progress and survive, let's say, through the next century, is that it can't just rely on the mystical side of it. You know, even the mystical bit is underrepresented, but it's there. But you can't just have the mystic. You also need the shaman, and that means that you have to be willing to go into the dark, into the shadow, into the demonic, even the demonic, as well as the heavenly realms, and to be able to go there. And obviously that, not, you know, that's it.
Amen
That's
to
hard.
that. It is hard, but I believe if you look at all the stories in the scripture of, you know, the saints and the apostles, they all went to hell and came back. Right. So
exactly.
that's the biggest issue I've had. You know, I have a tremendous respect for certain people and theologians and church fathers and scripture. But one of the disconnects that I had growing up was the preacher and the life that they led compared to how everybody else, you know, we were married, we had to have jobs, you know, we were living in kind of this different world from our preachers and the priest. So it always had this disconnect, because they were living more of a religious life, you know, and they gave their life to God, and they didn't have to have jobs like we had, and all the heartaches and the world that we deal with here in the West, especially. So it's almost as if you know, it was hard to relate to one another. And I feel that it still happens sometimes now. And you do have to go to heaven and hell. And I love your idea about a separate psychedelic order or something. And you hear about the Pope, you know, eventually allowing the secular, I forget what the layman to be in the priesthood. So, you know, there's talk about that. And I believe that would be the only way for something like that to work, because you have such a contingent force of the people that give themselves to God and the priest, and you know, that's how they believe, and it's a life of purity, right? It's not a life of going into hell, and you know, I believe a lot of us. So let's talk about that as well. When people go into these ceremonies, you know, these psychedelics, including myself, and I'm sure you could relate, Sebastian, they have these demonic presence and these evil things around them and within them that they haven't dealt with. And for some reason, when you go into the psychedelic realm, you're confronted with them. And that's what I believe the shaman is there to help you with, is to help you deal with that evilness or demonic things or whatever you want to call it that is holding you back spiritually. And that's what a lot of these ceremonies do. And these shamans, they help you shed that, right? It's the idea is to confront your demons, whatever it may be, your shadow, and then take it to the next level, to the light. And that's what the experience you hear all the time. You could see YouTube video after YouTube video, book after book of people saying the same thing.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts with people when they go into these ceremonies? It don't matter the race, the religion, they're always facing this evilness and this darkness that we all have. And I'm assuming, you know, we could say that even with a priest being a person and a human, they might have these same issues. So what are we dealing with when we see this? What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's a really good question. And I'll answer it first by describing an ayahuasca experience I had, which was one of my best and one of my worst. It actually was one of my worst. But it was interesting because usually it's a more of a mixed bag, but this one was literally split down the middle. The first, let's say, 4 hours of the experience, I was in heaven. So I was completely blissed out. You know, I've been doing meditating, mantra, all this kind of stuff, and it was like it was amazing. Then suddenly, I felt really sick. I had to get out of the tent and be sick. You know, there's the purge in ayahuasca. Famously, you have to, you know, and the next 4 hours where I was in hell, absolute hell. Partly because of the physiological thing, I couldn't stop, you know, vomiting, going to the toilet. It was awful. It was disgusting. I was out in the, you know, freezing cold, and I was in this nightmare. With hindsight, that would have, like, I don't know if it would have broken me, but you know, I don't know how I would have kind of survived that. It was really rough. But because I'd been in heaven for 4 hours before that, it was fine. It was fine. It was like kind of water off a duck's back, because I was filled with this kind of spiritual energy. So that basically by having that, I was able to ride it. And you know, it was just a bad thing that I had to just do. And then the next day it was like, woof, that was tiring. So that was quite, that really showed me how the spiritual side of it isn't just some kind of like lovely, nice kind of extra, or it's just, you know, the nice bit. It's an integral part of it. And that the spiritual training, which is why, you know, in a way, people who, mystics or people who actually have devoted themselves to God and have religious practices and pray all the time, the rest of it, are perfect candidates for this, because they will have done so much work already. They will be able to tap into these kind of the light, let's say, that the energy, the spiritual energy, that then they will be able to take to deal with the demons and the dark and all the rest of it. You think about the, you know, the harrowing of hell of Jesus, you know, after he died, going into hell for 3 days, and you know, bringing out the dead and all the rest of it. That kind of symbolizes that. It's like he could do that because he was the Son of God, you know. So it's almost like that's the way round. It's not, I mean, obviously it's a kind of circular thing, but once you kind of get the light bit, that spiritual bit, then you can start going deeper into the dark, as well as having, once you deal with your shadow, then you go higher into the light. So you could see it as a kind of like a spiral, I suppose, of getting more light and being able to deal with more of the darkness, in a sense. But the two things kind of reflect each other, I think.
They do. And I think this is a great time to possibly show your diagrams and your symbols and drawings that you wanted to. So that's kind of what I believe starts to symbolize what we're talking about, right? And
yeah,
the different realms of being.
Exactly. So
let me see here. You got it? Okay, great.
Right. So
okay, Sebastian's gonna share some symbols here.
Right. What I'll do, should I try and talk through this?
Sure.
I'll try and talk through this from the start, which goes via Buddhism.
And yeah, and I love this. You need to make a shirt. I'll be the first guy that buys it from you. My wife was looking at this morning. She goes, I love this, you know. She loved the ones, especially the Muggles and the Muppets.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
All
right. So this eventually turns into a cross, but I'll get there. This is based on the Tibetan Wheel of Life. Should I bring that up first, maybe, so that you can see?
If you think, yeah, that probably would be, people are more familiar with that, maybe.
Okay, and then I'll come back to that one. All
sure,
right.
That sounds good.
Okay, so basically this is a very famous teaching. There we go.
Let's see if
this
you
is a very
famous. Expand it down there at the bottom, if you could, please. Like, I don't know if you can, just a little bit more, because it's hard to see the middle of it. You should at the bottom have a little plus sign there to make it a little larger, the image. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, if you could do it a little more. Let's do it a little more. There you go. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
All right. Okay, so this is a very this is Tibetan, but it's in generally in Mahayana Buddhism, they use this as a kind of teaching method about life, basically. This is called the Wheel of Life. I'll very quickly describe what I'm interested in are the 6 realms. There's other stuff going on as well. In the middle, you've got the kind of the 3 poisons, greed, hate, and delusion, which kind of run the whole show. But the 6 realms are interesting because they're like the Christian idea of heaven and hell, but more fleshed out. So it's not just heaven and hell, but we do have heaven and hell. So you can see at the top here, this is the Deva Loka, which is the realm of the Devas, which is heaven, basically. And then you have the hell realms at the bottom, which is full of demons. But you also have these other four realms, which are kind of between the two. So next to heaven, down here on the left, is the human realm, which is kind of like the realm of the everyday, of kind of family life and domestic and going to the market and just riding horses and whatever they're doing there. On the other side, you've got the Titan realm, which is the fighting spirits or asuras. And here you can see this tree that grows into heaven, and it's hard to see there, but these are warriors with their shields and swords and all the rest of it, who are basically storming heaven, trying to break in. And the myth is, it's like we also have the same myth in the West of the kind of the Titans against the gods in the Greek myths, and so they have that at the East as well. There's perpetual war between the gods and the Titans. So these are kind of like warrior type fighting spirits. So that's the kind of top half. The bottom half, we've got the hell realms at the bottom. You've got the animals here, and then you've got the hungry ghosts on this side. And the hungry ghosts are basically living in this kind of wilderness where nothing grows. They can't eat because their necks are too thin, their stomachs are distended. They're never satisfied by anything. They're in this kind of perpetual, like Tantalus. They're always trying to fulfill their desires, but never can. So it's a kind of hellish realm as well. Whereas the actual hell is torture and more
So
like
that those people could possibly be someone that is just after their material desires, who some might call the bourgeois, and they just live for their appetite and, you know, just complete liberal.
Kind of.
Kind of. You know what I'm meaning, like a parasitic type of life.
Yeah. Let me bring up my one, and then you'll see how it maps on. Because remember these 6 realms, because that's what I'm using. So you've got heaven and hell, you've got the human realm, the Titan realm, hungry ghosts, animals, and hell at the bottom. So what I do is I update that with these archetypes. Oh, let's get rid of that one. With these archetypes, is that big enough? Right. So these hungry ghost realm that we were looking at, I just call that addicts. So basically, if you're addicted to something, you're a hungry ghost. I mean, Gabor Mate wrote a famous book in the realm of the hungry ghost, which is all about addiction. That's his speciality. And that's the realm that you're in if you're an addict, whatever it is that you're addicted to, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever it is. The animal realm, I call that victims. So I'm thinking of people who always feel like they're being treated like animals, like domestic animals, who basically are being victimized. And then at the top here, muggles is probably what you meant by the bourgeois kind of thing. So this is in the human realm, which basically means people who have quite a narrow view of the world. It comes from Harry Potter, probably people know that. So what it means, muggles are people who don't have any magic. So they're kind of like normies, let's say, something like that. So they're very parochial, you know, small world, that kind of thing. Human realm, they're happy doing their thing. And then the devas, I've turned into divas in heaven, meaning people who feel that they're top dogs, they're top of the heap. Muggles are basically trying to become divas. So in the sense that this is their road up to heaven. That's what they want. They want to be rich and famous, to have influence, and
trying to storm heaven without doing the work, right?
That the muggles do the work. So they do the 9 to 5. They slowly, like, you know, they really respect the divas and they want to get there themselves. So they work really hard, and you know that's the normal, let's say, career ladder. Yeah,
okay,
that
sure.
they do. The Muppets are different. They don't like the divas. They basically they want to bring them down, basically. So the idea is that that the Titans or the Muppets are people who are kind of, in a sense, let's say, ideologically possessed, and they identify with some kind of belief system that wants to basically destroy the hierarchical order of the human and heaven realms, let's say. So it can be political often, or it can be religious as well. So kind of fundamentalist religions are Muppets, kind of a lot of kind of revolutionary type people that can be Muppets. I call them Muppets partly because they like puppets, they are kind of the extensions of a giant kind of entity, which is a collective entity. So the Titan, in a sense, is, as a giant, means that this certain collective idea of the world supersedes the freedom of the individual thought. So they're kind of just, that's what I mean by that. It's kind of ideological, if you get me.
Yeah, I totally get it. I have to turn my volume down. I have someone grinding their stucco on the back, so it might get loud here and there. But yeah, I totally relate to that. And when I look at myself, sometimes I feel like I'm in the Titan realm. And let me explain. But the people who we would say are at the top of society and culture right now are who I believe are the fakes and the fake aristocrats and
Yeah,
the people who got there through this secularism and this black magic that I believe we're under, and a lot through nefarious means. So I seek to, in my mind, to kind of tear down the hierarchy, like here in the United States, that I believe are abusing the people and the being, you know, and making it to where, you know, whether you're a Muggles or you're a Muppet, whoever you are, they're controlling the show, you know. So I feel like I fit in the Titan realm right now.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, the idea is that we all have a bit of all of these, and yeah, it may be that you identify strongly with that. But basically the myth here is that this has always been the way, and it's always will be the way. That basically the Muppets will be at war with the Divas, you know, since the beginning of time and forever. But the Muppets will never win. Sorry, well, sorry about that. But you'll always keep trying.
So yeah, but if you didn't get what I was saying, you know, I feel like here in the United States, the aristocracy is just people that are like you and I that grew up, you know, from the same womb or whatever it might be, and they raised to the ranks, and whether it be Hollywood or through politics or what may have you, and they're selling out their children, their families, and the future to these corporations. So the elite, the people who, I say heaven's been turned upside down somewhat, and we got the demons on top. I don't know. So
Okay,
what I'm seeing at top are addicts and demons, and this wheel has been turned completely. And I seek, you know, I get all those realms, but I feel like they seek to make us, the divas seek to make the Muggles addicts and demons, and they also seek to control the Titans to make them demons. So I believe that it's kind of been turned around, and that's the problem that we're having here, especially in the West. What are your thoughts there, kind of in that thinking?
Well, I don't think you necessarily need to turn it around. I mean, the idea with all these lines is that it's all interconnected. I mean, I didn't draw a line going straight from the divas to the demons because it was getting too messy, but that there is also a line, you know, like Lucifer can fall straight down, you know, there is that. Or, for example, if you're a diva and you're very successful and you're like in Hollywood or you're a rock star, wherever, you know, and you just have like, you know, cocaine on tap and beautiful girls and all the rest of it, you can easily slip down and become an addict, you know, and that's very common, you know. And when you're an addict, you end up kind of having this weird kind of like bipolar thing with becoming a victim, so that there is a sense, there's all sorts of ways that you can flow around this diagram. I mean, the kind of like the usual way down is ultimately down to addict, to victim, and then down to demon. And demon is basically when you where you just want to destroy everything because you know, you've kind of lost everything. So that's the literal psychopaths. So I agree that, you know, there may be psychopaths in positions of power and influence and you know, up in heaven, but generally speaking, they are, hell is in really not, it's kind of in the prisons and in, you know, it's, we don't generally see that in kind of polite society, let's say. I mean, one way of seeing it is that the top 3 realms is where we generally tend to live in the ego, and when we slip down into the subconscious, then we're in the kind of shadow, in this kind of darker world, which has its kind of like effects on the higher. But the main point is that traditional therapy or traditional models of dealing with even politics, even if you're kind of like trying to change society, tries to fix this system. So, for example, you might go to a therapist as an addict, and they will try to fix your addiction. What will happen? Okay, if they do it well, you'll end up back being a Muggle. Okay, so then you'll be a Muggle for a while, but then soon you might slip over and be a Muppet, and then eventually a victim. So the idea is that we keep moving around this this diagram, and even if you get to heaven, even if you become a diva, you're probably quite narcissistic. These also match up to kind of personality disorders, which I talk about in my book, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder for the divas, superiority complex, all of these kind of things. It has its whole thing. You might have fun, you might have lots of money, but it's not really heaven. It's a kind of fool's heaven, and you can any moment slip down somewhere else. So this is the idea of the wheel of life. It just goes on and on and on, and there's no escape. So so it's a trap. It's a spider's web, basically. So I call this the wheel of what do I call it? Babylon, the wheel of Babylon. This is basically Babylon, and there's no escape from this.
Well, yeah, and
So,
that was my theory with that. It's, this knowledge has been known for a long time, and that we've been purposely flipped upside down. Again, I grew up here in the United States, and I had mentioned this liberal culture where, through the media, through, publications, Playboy, all these different things, I learned to not understand these types of spiritual teachings and to scoff at Christianity. So I believe I went down towards the addict realm and the ghost realm and even the demon realm, and then to the victim realm, right? Oh, geez, this society. So that would be my victim. I'm a victim of this country and the black magicians or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
And I look at my parents who were alcoholics, and I believe if they had a choice and they were taught right in a proper world, that I don't know. Again, I mean, I love the being liberal per se, and we're not all like in a Mormon society. We're all wearing white shirts and kind of doing the same thing. There's beauty in this mix match that we have now, but also we all have competing ideologies and ideas of how the world works. So even though I see that we've advanced as far as humanity, we're still even more divided than ever.
Exactly,
so it's interesting. I see these different things as well, and going 2 and 4, but I see myself as far as now taking on the role of the kind of the Titan, going against the bourgeois and the fake people who are abusing their power, because I feel that they are free. I'm not going after priests. I'm not going after the church. I'm going after people like you and I, who are multimillionaires, and they're abusing people and their power, and they're trying to tell us what to do, through the media. And I think they should shut up.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously that there is a place for that, that all of these things, this is what keeps the thing going. I mean, another thing that, you can play around with this a lot. And one of the other things that I found interesting is the relationship between the victims, for example, and the Titans. And often the Titans are fighting the divas on behalf of the victims. So there's a connection between a close connection between Muppets and victims. These are the champions. They're the champions of the victims. And often when they feel disheartened and they kind of feel like the divas are too powerful, they will slip down to victim mode themselves. So it there's a flip when they're feeling strong and collective, and and then they go on a big demo or whatever, then they're back to their Muppet kind of place. There's a parallel thing between the Muggles and the addicts, because if you get too comfortable in your small world, and then you start to get addicted to it. So that then because addiction is really about the narrowing of your world. So for example, heroin addicts' world is very, very tightly focused around getting their next hit. So ultimately, this is a kind of so these two are intimately connected, are similar to these. Anyway.
Sebastian, you've explained this better than I think anybody ever has in history, just so you know, in a modern sense where we could understand that. And I love the Titans and the victim side, because again, I could relate with that. And what it made me think of as you were talking about that in regards to our modern context would be, as per se, the Bolshevik, how do you pronounce it? The Bolsheviks.
The Bolsheviks.
The Bolsheviks, sorry. Yeah. And then the Jacobites. It was as if, they were fighting for the victims and the workers, right?
Exactly.
And they're going to kill the king and all the leaders.
Exactly. So this is how it goes. I mean, that's the political kind of side of it.
Sure.
Anyway, it's fascinating. You can go on and on around this forever for a lifetime, and we do. And there's all these things wrong with it. Now, the spiritual interesting thing, the reason I brought this picture up again is because of this figure outside the wheel. and this is really the key, because the whole point of this teaching mandala really is to show that the Buddhist way, usually there's a path coming out of here from somewhere, is outside of the wheel. So that to be a Buddha is basically to step off the wheel. You know,
Sure.
that you're
Okay.
no longer on the wheel. Yeah.
So there's a problem there, right? Where you see with the Buddhist, or the Buddhist might step outside of society in the world, where they're just working on their self rather than using their selves to help humanity as a shaman or a priest, right?
Well, there is a problem in that it can become, yeah, otherworldly, as you say, and you can kind of like, yeah,
Drop out.
give up and drop out on the whole thing. But this is where it gets to my model, maybe it gets a bit more interesting, which is that, here we go, this one. Right, so my idea is that instead of trying to fix the wheel, it's best to just put it to one side and kind of start again. So the Buddha, which is outside of the wheel, in a sense, represents the mystic. So being a mystic means that you can basically transcend your ego. Yeah. So if you think of the wheel of Babylon being the kind of like societal reflection of the ego, it's basically a diagram of the human ego. If you can transcend your ego, Buddha nature, which is basically your pure self, that kind of thing. And this is what, in terms of neuroscience, they're discovering is that they can actually really point to what that actually means. I don't know if you've come across this term, the default mode network.
No, I haven't.
No. Okay, so a lot of the psychedelic research that they've been doing, Robin Carter Harrison, Imperial, but also Gary Weber, who's a Buddhist. Is he Buddhist? But he's a very advanced meditator. Is that the brain has networks, yeah, that different kinds of networks, but one of the key ones is called the default mode network, which basically means that when you're not actually doing anything specific, so you're not kind of like focused on a task, you're not trying to do some, you know, you're just like daydreaming, sitting there kind of like, and your brain is relaxed and whatever. What happens is that the default mode starts to become active, and it goes around preoccupations about the past and the future, about your self-image. So it's basically the closest that we have in terms of the neural mapping of the brain to the ego. And this is something that we do automatically and that we kind of can't help doing. So they've done experiments where they put people in a room for 15 minutes with nothing to do, and people start kind of going crazy and tearing their hair out because it's a really uncomfortable place to be. We need something to do. And, you know, it's very well known how difficult it is for beginner meditators to just sit still, you know, and do nothing. You know, you need to give them something to do. Okay, count the breath then. Okay, all right, or do this or do that. Yeah, because we torture ourselves with the ego, with worry, with all sorts of things. Now, what they found with psychedelics, you know, when the trial was psilocybin and other psychedelics, is that this default mode network is inhibited almost completely. They've also found this with advanced meditators, like Tibetan Buddhists, that they can basically inhibit the default mode network so that it actually shuts down. And what that means is that the brain is then free to make all sorts of other connections and then to be more creative and all the rest of it, which is why psychedelics create these kind of experiences of, you know, of all sorts of almost hyperactivity in the brain, because it's not being constrained by the default mode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. You know, this default mode, it makes me think, you know, the ego, and when I relate this to, you know, other sciences, biological sciences, we have the second brain. So a lot of my teachings and what I'm delving into now is these people that you would call addicts and ghosts and demons. You know, I'm very fascinated by this behavior, you know, because I've been in that realm myself, and meaning that, you know, I've been to jail, prison. I was an addict at one time. This is 20 years ago, Sebastian. So this was the result of me not controlling myself and understanding these teachings, you know, and going in to hell and living a really liberal life. But in any event, you know, I went into that realm and I started seeing other people that after I got out of it, loved ones, and even my son is having a problem where I saw him going from being, you know, more like a philosopher and a warrior, or whatever you might call it, go into the bourgeois realm, and then eventually that liberal lifestyle he was living with a girlfriend at the time. They literally would drink 4 or 5 days a week. They would go out to eat almost every single night. He went up to 230 pounds, and that eventually led into a pill addiction, and then the pill addiction led into a heroin addiction, and now he's completely changed to where his behavior is demonic, and you know, he's in that parasitic realm, and he's living a kind of a one-track mind as he's lashing out at all the other people that love him. And so I sought to understand what was going on. And long story short, there's this connection with people that have these addiction problems with drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, and so forth, as they develop fungal infections in their GI tracts and within their bodies. Okay, so if you research the science, it takes a while to get down to it, but I believe they're being controlled by their second brain, and this is a part of our ego per se. And I believe there's actually two spheres in the realm, meaning there's the new sphere that they talk about, the astral realm. So when you're a mystic and a philosopher, you're kind of like Vitruvian man, right? You're activated, you're using your brain. But when you're kind of turned upside down, my theory is, you know, you're in the demonic, you're in the parasitic realm, and that is actually controlled by an earth force, basically the lower noosphere. So, and that would be connected to our second brains, to our ego. Just it's basically just the drives of the human. And then of course, over time, based on our programming and culture and societies, that ego went from, you know, just wanting to eat, sleep, have sex, whatever have you, to having all these other cultural influences to kind of put more onto our shadow, you know. So so my theory there is that this ego, this demonic activity is somehow connected to our second brain, meaning that starts taking over this brain through the vagus nerve and the various things. Do you have any kind of training or research or science into what I'm talking about, how you could maybe relate it? And because they relate to your diagrams a lot.
Yeah, I mean, well, there is work on that, you know, and people have found that there is a kind of second brain in the gut that, you know, has even effects on Parkinson's, for example, and that, you know, there's a lot of neurons down there. So that actually does fit in with the model very well. So if I continue, you'll see how it connects, because the mystic here is associated with the third eye, as you were referring to. So this model is basically, well, these 6 points are the opposites of the wheel of life. Yeah. So the mystic is the opposite of the diva. If you think of the diva as being the, you know, a kind of narcissistic ego, kind of who's a successful ego, but still, you know, that ego. The mystic is the opposite, where you kind of are no ego, you transcend the ego.
Well, see, that's where I would have no problem as a Titan.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be going after the mystic, right? I would see no need, because it would be truth. We would be living in truth, right?
Yeah. So the idea is that if you can overcome your own, because that's the thing, we all have all these elements. So we all have our own divas as well as Muppets, all the rest of it. So if you can get into the state of the mystic, this is where we get into the psychedelic thing here, then we can go all the way back, all the way down to the shaman, which is in the gut. So this is your second brain. So I identify this in the hara, which is the Swadhisthana is the sacral chakra. Okay, so the idea is that these are connected to energy points in the body.
And the mystic controls his second brain.
Well, the mystic allows for the descent of consciousness, because consciousness generally is held exclusively in the ego, which is generally in the brain, in the head, more or less, because is on. Once you kind of release it from the default mode network and from overthinking, Then you have consciousness that is freed up to then enter the body. And when you go into the body and descend right down to the, to the lower chakras, basically, then you can start to activate the Kundalini. So this is a kind of energetic thing, and awaken your kind of inner shaman, which is the flip side of the demon. So the idea here is that the demon is all of that kind of stuff in the id that is hidden in your, or repressed in your, your lower unconscious, that you can't deal with. It's your hell, your personal hell, where all your demons are. But if you can go there with the kind of light of consciousness from the mystic, then the shaman is able to work with it, not necessarily to do battle and kill all the demons, but to kind of heal them, let's say.
Be like Solomon and control the 72 demons, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And this is the shamanic kind of archetype that kind of does that. So this connects the central, as you say, the vagus nerve, or the sushumna of the body. And the important thing why connected to the Christianity is the top half is when you cross yourself. So at mass, as a good Catholic, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, sure. You cross yourself, yeah. But you stop at the heart. So this crossing is a mantra, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and it's a mantra that is embedded, that is rooted in the body. So it's a somatic mantra that people don't realize that's what they're doing, but that's what you're doing: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is a very powerful spiritual, the esoteric technique. But it's very top heavy. It stops at the heart. You're not dealing with the demonic, with the lower unconscious, with the lower chakras, even with sexual energy. And this is something that Christianity has struggled with always, in terms of this chastity and the incontinence and the whole thing about the relationship of the body and sex. So what I've done is I've basically extended the energetic cross to a double cross, so that you have this mantra using the archetype. So you have mystic, shaman, and then the warrior monk goes to the hips, which to the left is the warrior monk, and then the philosopher king is the shoulders, if you see what I mean. So it's a kind of double cross, which is extending the normal crossing yourself of Christianity. And each of these archetypes is the flip side of the wheel of life character, yeah? So the warrior is the flip side of the victim. So the idea is that you basically cultivate warrior virtues and inner strength and character strength. The monk is the flip side of the addict. So you cultivate kind of abstinence, or ability to resist temptations, that kind of thing, to go without much. You can just go with bread and water if you're a really good monk, that kind of thing. The philosopher is the flip side of the Muppet. In this sense, the philosopher is someone who can take a wider view and basically see something from all sorts of different perspectives without narrowing things down into one rigid belief system, which is basically what the Muppet is really about. So if you think again about fundamentalism, then you think the world is like this, boom, 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 and anything else is whatever, demonic, or is wrong, or is evil, and this is the truth. Whereas a philosopher can step back and say, okay, well, there's some truth there, but there's these other truths, and so you get a wider view. And then finally, the king or queen, I didn't put the feminine things here, is the flip side of the muggle, because ultimately the muggle defines their identity in relation to other people in terms of status hierarchies, and in terms of who you are, what your job is, and all the rest of it. So that's the way where you get your self-esteem from. Whereas when you understand your essential inner sovereignty, that your soul, let's say, is a king or queen, then you're beyond that kind of social maneuvering and that kind of keeping up with the Joneses type thing that muggles live by. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Sorry, I had my mic muted. The guy is grinding again out there. So
Okay.
yeah, please keep going. We have about 15 more minutes, and I love this. I believe it makes perfect sense how, you know, the mystic can go into the shaman via the second brain. I feel that's important. So that would be more along Carl Jung's, you know, facing the shadow. We all
Yeah.
have this shadow, and we're
Yeah.
to integrate it into our being.
Yeah.
And I believe when you're Vitruvian man and you have the spiritual and you have the light overshadowing the darkness, you're able to understand your own shadow, your own darkness, your own demons, and to face that and to change them and other habits to more go along with your path. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe this is a great diagram, and a lot of people would love this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think you know, this fits along the lines of what I'm learning, you know, as far as teaching. And I feel this is how, you know, society should truly run. You know, if we had a
Exactly.
hierarchical structure like
Yeah.
this, you know, we would
Yeah.
have quickly fix a lot of our problems in the world, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's the basic idea is, yeah, to try to build this up as a, in a way, it's kind of like a character building model that by working on these elements, you're becoming more, but that's one side of it. Let me just connect it to the yogas, which maybe make it clearer as well. So this is also inspired by the integral yogas of the East, from the Bhagavad Gita and things like that. So for the mystic, that would be Dhyana Yoga, which is Dhyana, Chan, Zen. Is basically the yoga of meditation. So that makes, you know, that's clear. So that's kind of Zen. Basically, you start with Zen. The shaman is Kundalini Yoga. So the Kundalini, probably your viewers will know about Kundalini being the kind of serpent energy that you awaken in your body that then can rise up, and that's kind of your inner somatic, let's say, yeah, your inner power. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what I like to say, basically, think of your Kundalini as your central nervous system, and within your central nervous system, you have various energies, one of them being phosphorus. So phosphorus, you know, when it's in your lower chakras, you know, and if you utilize it, say, just for sex and your lower energies, you don't have it rising up your Kundalini, the serpent
Right.
energy,
Right.
i.e., the phosphorus, to your head chakra, right, your third eye.
Right. Yes.
Right.
So
Okay.
there's techniques for sublimation and that kind of stuff. Tantra uses that. Okay, and then the other ones, the warrior is associated with the karma yoga. Karma yoga is the yoga of action. So this is about being effective and active in the world, and also about developing the body. So kind of like, you know, you're in a very direct way. So that's probably the most associated with traditional hatha yoga, that kind of thing. You know, the martial arts, etc. You know, dance. The monk is associated with bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion. So that's about kind of cultivating higher emotions through things like music, for example, singing or playing or listening to music. You know, this is about refining your emotions. Yeah.
The arts, right?
The arts, exactly. So you can see that we're going from this kind of like inner thing to the body, to then the emotions. Then the philosophers, Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of knowledge. So this is obviously developing your mind, ability to think clearly and you know, more broadly. And the king is related to Raja Yoga, which is, Raja means king, which is the royal road, the royal way, which is the kind of most direct yoga, which is basically the yoga of self-knowledge. So that's about understanding, who am I, in terms of what is my essence of my soul. So that's why once you kind of see that your identity transcends all the identities given to you by society, but that you are ultimately a, you know, in the image of God, ultimately, because that's what traditionally the king was. It was, you know, the pharaohs, let's say, in Egypt, is, there's nothing beyond the king but God, in a sense, and every one of us is that, you know, has this direct connection to the divine. So the model is a way to try to kind of develop all sides of the human personality in a positive direction, which counteracts their negative sides in the wheel of Babylon, as I call it, the wheel of life, which is kind of socially sanctioned. So in a way, that the kind of demonic thing that I think you're alluding to, that everything's upside down and the rest of it, is basically trying to find some kind of transcendence or some kind of final salvation, let's say, in the wheel of life where it doesn't exist. And that's basically the story of Lucifer. Lucifer is the brightest angel, but because he tries to be God, that's why he becomes Satan, because it's like the ego trying to itself take the place to usurp the rightful God, if you see what I mean. So just the last thing I want to say about that is that this model is also connected to what I call the ray of creation, which is rediscovering the traditional hierarchical understanding of existence as a kind of chain of being that has a transcendence beyond us, kind of a superhuman, and also an infrahuman within us. And obviously science has, we know that through the infrahuman from science, the cellular, the atomic, in a sense, going down to the shaman and talking about the gut brain. We were talking about going into these kind of, to about phosphorus, all this kind of stuff. This is the infrahuman. So to appreciate that below us, there is, well, in the ray of creation, I start with Amun, which is okay, these are Egyptian gods, by the way. I'll go very quickly. Amun, which is the void, nothingness at the core of everything. Then you have Ra, which is the sun god, which is, I don't need to tell you this, obviously, which is pure energy. So this is the energy of the universe. The sun represents that. That's the energy within the atom, let's say, the E equals mc squared. Atom, which means the all, and this is the material realm of basically atoms, of matter. Then you have Ka, which is the life force, Ba, which is the soul, which is our psyche, and then Gaia and Ja, which is the planetary, and then the universal. So the part of the idea is that the wheel of life is a trap because it has created a whole world purely around Ba, which is the human world, if you see what I mean. And it has basically cut off the transcendent above, which is the Gaia Ja, and the what's below us, so the kind of biological even, and the infrahuman. So another way of looking at it is as the Christian cross. If you map on the ray of creation onto the central line here, you have Amun at the bottom, Ra, Ka, Ba, Gaia, Ja going up. Ba, which is at, I associate this with the actual chakras of the chakra system. Ba is in the throat, so it's associated with speech, which is basically the human manas in Hinduism of cognition and the ego. We live on the horizontal, which is the social, which is basically society. Ba and the collective is the horizontal, and when it's only horizontal and we forget the vertical, then we're in what I call Ba Babylon, which is the trap of the wheel of creation, the wheel of Babylon, because we've lost our connection, our vertical connection with the transcendent and superhuman and with the infrahuman. So the main point of this practice is to reconnect with the vertical.
What I see when I see the diagram and you explain it so eloquently is I see, of course, the United States of America, where we don't have a marriage of religion and state. So when I see that line, I see the state in a secular society, and there's no spirituality. So we're stuck on this line and unable to transcend. And that's what I see the problem with almost every human or citizen here. And where there's the big disconnect is, the people that are operating, in the mystic, the shaman realm, which I believe I am. I see myself in this diagram more than I do in the other one, and just being a Titan. So this one makes a lot more sense to me. So thank you.
Saves you.
So yeah, you saved me. Thank you. I was like, geez, but I was okay. Hey, I'm a philosopher, and I like to, look at my shadow as well and see where I'm at. But this makes more sense to me, definitely. And how does that sense in regards to the divas being the fake divas, and the people, as far as my Titan role in the Will of Babylon, you know, maybe there's a reason for
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's great. And then you definitely, you understood, you know, the second brain. I feel a lot of people are turned upside down, and they don't operate from this diagram. They haven't faced their shadow.
Mhm.
So this is great teachings, you know, Sebastian. So, you know, thank you. Is there
Cool.
anything else that you would like to share with us in the audience before we wrap up here? Or?
Well, I could add a couple of things very quickly if
Of
you've got
course,
time.
yeah, I do.
Which is connecting it back to psychedelics again, because, you know, in a way, this is a psychological model that you know, kind of stands alone. But the
Sure.
reason why I find it very helpful in the psychedelic experience, when we're talking about the risks of going into difficult demonic realms and all the rest of it, I think I call it the diagram, the armor of Christ, which is, you know, which is taken from the New Testament. Paul talks about the armor of Christ several times, but you think about crossing yourself in this way, it's a kind of protection. It's a kind of something that you do to defend yourself against kind of malevolent demonic forces. You know, people do that anyway with this cross, but this is a kind of more effective one. You can imagine doing it very fast and creating some kind of Doctor Strange kind of
Energy
shield,
pattern, right?
energy pattern. Exactly. So that's what you're doing. You're creating an energy pattern, connecting directly with these qualities of these archetypes to ward off ultimately the opposite qualities. So obviously you can ward off these opposite qualities in ordinary life. So if you're feeling a bit of a victim, you connect to your warrior, etc. So that's a kind of like obvious way of doing it. But in the psychedelic experience, doing them all and integrating them together creates a kind of a protection against these malevolent forces that, you know, we don't really know where they come from. Are they your inner shadow, or are they extraneous? We don't really know. So it made me think, actually. Recently I was talking about how, as children, you know, from the old Dracula movies, you do the sign of the cross, you know, with your fingers to ward off a vampire or something like that. That's kind of like in the kind of Gothic imagination. It's a little bit like that, that you create this cross to ward off evil spirits. Let's say, if you're going to be use that kind of language. There's also yeah, and the last point I want to make is that in the psychedelic ceremony, the way that I organize it is that you actually go through all of these stages in order, so that we start by entering the mystic through meditation and through, you know, getting very, very focused. So you get into a state of Zen and quiet, and you inhibit the default mode network and all the rest of it. Then as you start coming up on the psychedelic and it starts to take effect in the body, we go down into the shaman and start to kind of experience it in the body. And then we do warrior movement kind of body work. After that, we do Bhakti yoga, kind of devotional practices with music and singing. Then afterwards, we reflect on the thing and try to make sense of the experience as a philosopher. And then we end with a meditation to bring it all together. So actually, it works as a nice roadmap for navigating a psychedelic experience in a kind of organized way that actually you know, strengthens each of these elements in a kind of logical progression.
That makes perfect sense, Sebastian.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening out there, audio only, we will have those diagrams on, of course, Sebastian's website. I will put a link on gnosticwarrior.com as well. So there's going to be people, of course, that are just listening, you know, in their cars or whatever may have you. So I don't want you to feel left out. These diagrams really show what he's talking about, and they fit also my teachings as well. And I think they'll benefit humanity, and you could use these to basically keep yourself in that realm. I mean, I assume some people that are into tattoos will get tattoos of this in the future. You know, I know the church or whatever might not like that, but this to me is a perfect roadmap, as you'd said. And then also the way that you're doing, do you hold retreats, or what are you doing, online classes?
Yeah.
Or?
exactly. Yeah. So that's all on the website as well. If you go to the meditation page, then I explained a little bit more about how the retreats work. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and I would actually love to partake in one of these. So
Yeah.
count me in.
Love to have you.
Yeah. So this is
Excellent.
very interesting. So where can people find more of your great work and also purchase your book, Sebastian?
So again, the website is really the place to go, where it has all the information. So if you put a link, that would, and from there you can find the book. So I have a page on the book and a link to Amazon where you can buy the book.
Awesome. And can you
yeah.
mention the website? Because again, some people are just listening, and if you can go to full screen right now as well, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, people are listening audio and they'll be in their cars. So what's the website address?
I need to get an easier one to remember, but it's
Sure.
it's www. That's the easy bit. Pachananda.com. So to remember that, Pacha, like Pachamama. I don't know if you know, Pachamama is in Quechua it's a Mother Earth. So the Pacha bit, and Ananda means bliss in the Indian tradition. So they're the two brought together. Pachananda.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's easy to remember. And then of course I will put a link on Gnostic Warrior, and the name of your book on Amazon.
Here it is. It's the Confessions of a Psychedelic Christian, and that's the model again. You can see.
Yeah, you have your diagram there.
Psychedelic vibe. Yeah.
What do you call it? Do you have a name for it yet?
For this model?
Yeah.
Well, that particular one I called the armor of Christ. That one.
Oh, okay.
Or the double cross or whatever. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
The armor of Christ. All right. Hey, Sebastian, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. I could talk to you for another hour. Unfortunately, I've got to get to work and the family duties, and I'm sure you have things to do, but let's revisit some more of your teachings maybe in the next 3 to 6 months. What I want to do is people that I connect with and I have a similar path, I would love to have them on the show, because again, I could talk another hour and a half easily with you. So let's continue this in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. And, yeah, definitely. And again, it's been a great time. Thank you for being on the Gnostic Warrior, and until next time, take care.
Brilliant. Yeah. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.